Hi everybody, and I really want to thank St. John's for conducting this Meet the Candidates night. I came to New York in 1971 from Washington, D.C. I came to attend religious school, and after I graduated high school, I went on to seminary, and for 3 years, and then college. At that time, college wasn't for me because after the seminary, I really wanted to get out there and be part of the working world, and it was part of when I studied in college American government. I really couldn't make heads or tails out of it, and later on, I really learned to appreciate about that. In any case, I took bookkeeping. I went into private industry, and for a few years doing that, and then I ended up in the post office for 25 years. I'm a retired postal worker, and during that time, since '89, I invested in real estate. I renovated 6 properties, and I take a lot of pride in that. My big plank, yes, whenever I see my name listed somewhere is about education, and it's partly because I appreciated religious education. As I said, I didn't always appreciate secular, and that's why I'm a big proponent of education, because I came to appreciate its value. I think that education is absolutely essential. It's transformative. If we had a superior educated workforce with advanced technical skills, our economy would be altogether in a different place. The way our educational system is set up, it also involves a tax structure, because middle class people are paying for other middle class public education, and they're also paying for the rich when rich people send their kids to public school. And there's also a lot of waste in education, which I think we could get rid of if we went to vouchers.
Good evening. On behalf of the question panel, I'd like to welcome you and thank you all for being here. We're going to start with education and higher education issues in New York State. Please briefly explain what can or should be done to make both public and private higher education more affordable and accessible.
Well, it turns out that people follow trends, and we've had different bubbles, the internet bubble, housing bubble, and some people are saying that there's a college bubble. The idea that everybody has to go to college and get a liberal arts degree. I mean, if there's a specialized degree, that's something else. But a liberal arts degree, I attended a lecture where the person was talking about how these degrees are really diluted, and as it turns out, Mr. Visky referred to it, that there's $1 trillion in student debt that students are having trouble paying, and 50% of college students this year were not able to find work. So now I also spoke to somebody in education. He said that the public schools fell apart, or there was a great decline once the emphasis was turned away from or vocational training was greatly diminished. So this follows a trend, or that the trend continues into higher education, where people are not concentrating on real marketable technical skills, and they're running towards this generalized college liberal arts degree, and it's turning out that the market is rejecting it by not rewarding these graduates with work. And it's costing these students a ton of money. And now the idea is President Obama and others are saying, well, let's forgive the debt. Well, yeah, I mean, people are caught in a real situation. Perhaps the debt should be forgiven, but this is not something we should continue. That's not a rewarding path for us to go on.
Okay, we were joined in progress by Ms. Rozic. I'm going to give you 1 minute to introduce yourself, and we'll pick up the program from there.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I'm sorry that I'm late. I only live 2 blocks away, so luckily I got here just in time. Many of you know my story. I am a first-generation American. I moved to Fresh Meadows when I was only 2 years old. And since then, I went to local schools in the area, including Townsend Harris High School, one of the premier public high schools in Queens. And I graduated NYU not too long ago and have spent my entire professional life working in public service as the chief of staff to an assembly member. I'm running in the 25th Assembly District that represents, hopefully, to represent parts of South Flushing, all the way from Fresh Meadows to Hillcrest, Auburndale, and parts of Bayside Hills. I am looking to continue all of the good work that I've started in the Assembly, whether it is work on behalf of tenants, anti-guns, and work on behalf of immigrant communities. I really have a couple of priorities that you would indulge me just for 1 second. I would like to outline.
30 seconds.
Whether it is, campaign finance reform, or raising the minimum wage, or making our education system what it needs to be so that students are competitive not only for college but for the workplace thereafter. Those are some of the things that we really, really need to prioritize in the state legislature, and that I am ready, willing, able to roll up my sleeves and get to work on. It really takes strong champions to go to Albany and to make things happen. We have a great opportunity to shake things up, and I'm looking forward to doing that.
So this is more of a general question that I think that a lot of students really watching the political spectrum are concerned with. In our ever-polarizing world, how would you, as a member of a particular side of the aisle, reach across to support or create bipartisan legislation or to really conserve your constituents in a bipartisan way?
I would like to just piggyback on what Senator Stavisky is saying. As the chief of staff in the state assembly, I learned very early on that if you grab hold of an issue and really push for it, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. If you have a great issue that deserves the attention and deserves mention and pushing it through the state legislature, it is possible. And whether you're working with a Republican Senate, which I've had to deal with, and a Democratic Senate for the brief moment that it was in Democratic control, or whether you're working with your Republican colleagues within the state assembly to move a bill through committees and into finally into law, it is possible even in the dysfunction that is Albany. I've seen it over the tenure of 6 years working for Brian Kavanaugh. I passed, I was helpful in passing over 20 bills into law, and that includes, bills that we sponsored with a Republican Senate. Whether it's, trying to fight gun violence or trying to push back against hospital closures, it doesn't matter if you are a Republican or a Democrat. We all know, Republican or Democrat, we all know someone who has been affected by the DREAM Act and who just wants to stay in America. Those are the issues that we can find common ground on, and that is what I would continue to do in the state assembly, working with colleagues on both sides of the aisle, in both chambers, and with the governor to just keep that going.
Recently, I was invited by Planned Parenthood to interview with them, and in Republican circles, Planned Parenthood is a boogeyman. And that's not the way I see it. Barry Goldwater was pro-choice, by the way, and I sent in the questionnaire. I came to interview, and I did learn something very interesting and crucial from them, that in New York State, the law about abortion is on the criminal code, and there is no health provision for the mother. And that means that after 24 weeks, if there is a major health complication with a mother, a doctor in New York State does not have the right to order an abortion. There can be major complications. What doctors in New York State have to do is send the patient to another state. So I would say that in terms of getting along with the other side, two words come to mind: fair hearing. The idea is to give the other side a fair hearing. On the other hand, after my session was almost over with them, I did ask them to what extent they emphasize adoption in their organization, and whether they stress to their clients the idea that women can often have guilt and remorse after they've gone through an abortion, because women have a nature of nurturing life, and an abortion can go against their nature. I'm not saying for everyone, but the idea is that, and if these women offered their baby for adoption, people wouldn't have to go to Russia and Romania and India to adopt.
Playing off the question that was asked before about Shelley, so I'm not making it that personal to Shelley. So,
Sure.
Are there things about the way the New York State Assembly operates in terms of its leadership, in terms of the way how it flows up in your body to the speaker, that you might want to change?
Absolutely. So I've learned firsthand working in the state assembly that it is quite dysfunctional. You know, the Brennan Center gave it the title of one of the most, if not the most dysfunctional state legislatures in America. And whether you're talking about how seniority-based it is, or how leadership-driven it is, there are a lot of different things that we can change. What I'm excited about is that I offer a different perspective. Even, you know, if you're talking about what happened over the summer with a lot of the scandals that have been happening, you know, I offer, as a former female staffer and a young person, a different voice, a different perspective, and one that Albany desperately needs. You know, we do need to change Albany, and whether it's campaign finance reform so that smaller contributions and more individuals can get excited about government and get involved and run for office, or you're talking about smaller campaign finance reform or election reform bills that we can pass through the assembly. There's a lot to do, and a lot that has yet to be done. So I'm looking forward to getting to Albany, rolling up my sleeves and working on those bills. And also just offering a different perspective, like I mentioned before. You know, you have to work in a bipartisan way, you have to work with your colleagues, but I think that the number one way to change Albany is to send rank and file members who will go to Albany and work on behalf of their community and work hard on issues that they care about, and that is the number one way to reform Albany.
If I could just piggyback off that for Mr. Fuchs, you would be a Republican member of the New York State Assembly from New York City. That is as minority comes. How would you do your job effectively as a Republican in the minority from the city in the State Assembly? How would you be an effective advocate despite what might be an imbalance?
Again, it's a matter of giving everyone a fair hearing. It's about considering the merit of the argument. For instance, I buck my party in terms of tax structure. I believe that with the great disparity in income and in wealth between the rich and the poor, the middle class is vanishing. The wealth class has multiplied its portion by 15 times over the middle class over the last 30 years. I believe that at this time, being that businesses are sitting on $2 trillion in cash, that rich people, wealthy people, should have a higher tax burden. And I agreed with President Obama about this a long time ago. And now it seems that Mitt Romney is kind of going on that also, idea of limiting deduct. I'm sorry?
Yeah, no, so that's an idea that you don't hold a Republican point on or differ with your party. But to me, maybe I'm asking more of a procedural question. How do you make your voice heard in a chamber where you're such a minority?
Well, I assume they have microphones in the state assembly, and I would speak the same way I'm speaking now. I mean, if anybody wants to hear me, I mean, if they want to walk out when I'm speaking, I don't have much of a choice other than to, bar the door. But it's a matter of being fair, being reasonable, looking at common ground, and checking your ego at the door.
What is one specific piece of legislation or one initiative that you would champion to promote economic growth, private sector investments, and job retention and growth in New York State?
Okay. So there are two things that I want to highlight. The first is definitely raising the minimum wage, right? We have a great solution to helping out working families and working individuals, and we definitely need to raise the minimum wage. The second thing is, like I've mentioned before, the New York State DREAM Act. We need to keep smart people in New York. We need to keep immigrants and our neighbors who want to stay here. It's what our country was based on and what it was founded on. So those are the two proposals that I would say.
Same question. I think we can eliminate, excuse me. I think we can free up a lot of money if we reform the educational system. If people would be able to go send their kids to the schools of their choice, they would be able to find education for cheaper tuition, and in other words, you give people more money and they create an economy. I'm not an expert in predicting which industries people should go to. I think that's a bad business, like President Obama, putting money in failing green energy businesses like Solyndra and others. I think the government cannot effectively predict which industries will do well. The idea is to free up money that the government is taking from the people and let the people, with their creativity, go into the businesses that are best suited for the marketplace. The idea is that the education, by funding $18,000 per pupil for state education, the state, the archdiocese has tuition for elementary school at $4,000 and high school for $7,000. Now, if you allow people to educate their kids those kind of tuitions, and the state would be out of it, the state would be lessening the burden on people, and we would have more money for private industry.
Question for all of you. Richard Ravitch was part of a report recently that talked about the fact that New York local governments in New York State were really threatened with substantial social and political crises with the funding problems that they're having in this economy. a lot of mayors, and I know probably you've heard this during the February hearings, a lot of mayors, local people will come up and complain to the state legislature about the mandates, 15% of Medicaid costs, and all these other things that are pushed from Albany to local governments. Could you address that issue of the impending crisis that Ravage sees at the local government area in New York, and what New York State can do to help this instead of exacerbating the problem?
As far as the mandates, we as citizens don't really have open access to government, to the inner workings of government. If you try to look up what the budget is and different programs, you'll just swim around in a bunch of factoids and all that. Government has to be more transparent, more open. Audits, we talk about waste in government. Well, I happen to think that government does a great job in terms of auditing its operations. It's another question whether they take effective action on the audits, but I think the audits are great. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but if like Mr. Concannon was mentioning MTA, if they audited and they presented these audits in a user-friendly way, we could see where our tax money is going and why all these mandates are being pushed onto the city. Basically, it comes down to money. Where's the money? I mean, how is it being used? And is it really necessary? I mean, to go back to education, I think there's tremendous waste in education. We don't know. I mean, the teachers get a certain amount of it, and then 18,000 per pupil. Where does all that money go? So basically, it comes down to transparent government.
So not only did the former lieutenant governor have that great report, but also the New York Times did a whole series on local governments and how crippled they are. Unfunded mandates are crippling a lot of the cities upstate, and out on Long Island, localities are in severe deficits. If not now, then in 5 and 10 years. It's definitely something we need to work on in Albany. We've got a great governor who will lead on that issue, and I look forward to working with both him and both the Senate and the Assembly on that topic.
Just coming back to Ms. Rozic for 1 second. If you win, will you vote for Sheldon Silver, to be the speaker again?
You know what? I'm not sure.
Well, how did you feel he handled?
There's an investigation pending, and I would really like to see the results of J-Pope and what they find out and go from there.
Mr. Fuchs, do you? We hear a lot about the minimum wage. Do you support raising the minimum wage? Is that something you think is a good idea?
I do think it's a good idea with qualifications. Not every company should be subjected to the minimum wage. I think a certain size company should be subject to the minimum wage. Yes, but exemptions for smaller companies.
Sure. This question is specifically for Ms. Rozic and Mr. Fuchs. What ideas do you have to bring business right here locally to Union Turnpike and the rest of your district, where we're seeing so many vacancies, and it's right in our own neighborhood? So.
Yeah, I grew up 2 blocks away from Union Turnpike, and increasingly over the years, you see all of these empty storefronts going up and never getting filled. I'm still waiting for my hair salon to still open. So there's a lot that we can do, whether it's tax credits for small businesses or encouraging new tech services or new industries to move into Eastern Queens. We need to show businesses that Eastern Queens is the place to be, that it's easily accessible with transit, and it's a place that people not only want to open their businesses, but keep their businesses here. I also want to ask the audience really quick, is anyone here tweeting the event? Because I will also take questions via Twitter. I think it's a younger crowd, and if people want to get involved, that's a great way to do it.
And your Twitter handle is?
@Nily.
N-I-L-L-Y.
N-I-L-Y.
N-I-L-Y. Mr. Fuchs.
You know, I really wouldn't be able to help you out with recommendations for our local, you know, Avenue Union Turnpike. But I would say that money is fungible, and when you establish a system where money flows, it finds its niche. It finds its, you know, like water finds its level. If people had more money, I guarantee you Union Turnpike would be full. And there are two ways how people can have more money, and it happens either from reducing government waste, which I talked about before in terms of, again, my pet thing about education. I mean, and the reason I say that is because a lot of people who are paying private tuition and paying their property tax are really, really squeezed. These people would have money to set up businesses and to provide economic activity. And the other way is to shift the burden from the middle class taxes. In other words, give even more. You know, I'm going against a Republican establishment here. That the wealthy can bear a heavier burden in taxes and let the middle class have more money to spend on products and services. And when the middle class has more money to spend on products and services, Union Turnpike will be full.
This is a question for Mr. Weprin and Ms. Rozic. Part of the preparation Brian Brown did for this, and he always does a great job on this, is he gave us a handout. And one of the things it says here is that since 1960, U.S. job growth has been 4 times that in New York State. Based on this experience, it's obvious we need to improve the state's overall economic climate. Now, I'm asking the 2 Democrats this question for this reason. The Republicans will tell us we need to cut taxes, regardless of the issues on that, but certainly on business climate. What's the Democratic policy? What are your ideas as to how to keep New York State from turning into Arkansas, which upstate New York do very well, in terms of development and economic growth through Democratic Party politics?
So, as I mentioned before, raising the minimum wage would be one of them. You know, having paid sick leave in New York would be another viable solution. And also, you know, in addition to encouraging new industries, we can get a lot more done if government is open and transparent, if things are, you know, easier and out in the open. I think that's one of the many ways that we can be encouraging new industries and actually having a real discussion on economic development in New York State. And just to, you know, answer the question about raising the minimum wage and driving out jobs, we've seen studies in San Francisco and Milwaukee that that's just not true, that it actually helps the local industries.
So in Queens over the past, let's call it 10 years, we've had a number of elected officials arrested, many imprisoned, some still in prison. What will you do if you're elected, and when you're elected? What do you do to make sure that your office is as transparent and open, I've heard that a couple times, to your constituents? How do you make sure that constituents know exactly what you're doing once you're elected? And we could start with Mr. Fuchs.
Obviously, you're referring to legal activity, because the illegal activity is going to be under the table anyway, right? Right?
Yeah, I mean, yes, but if I'm going to pick one case out of, well, top of my head, Shirley Huntley had a nonprofit that was getting money from the state, and then that ended her up in a little bit of trouble. So my question to you, and it's a broad question, how do you make your office transparent? In general, I would hope that all your activities would be transparent, but how do you make your office transparent to your constituents? How do you keep them informed of what you're doing on a daily basis, where your member allocations go, that kind of thing?
I don't know why this should be so complicated in the world of politics. Right now, when we're candidates, we have to account for every penny that we spend on campaign finance. I mean, you know, every deadline comes around, and you have to fill in that report. If Shirley Huntley is being financed from a nonprofit, I mean, yeah, that nonprofit, whatever money. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm just asking like a concrete example on a daily basis, on a weekly basis,
On
on a monthly basis. What will you do as an assembly member to keep your constituents informed of what you're doing?
There has to be a system. It's not just a matter of one person, what they're doing. There has to be a system where, yeah, every transaction that goes that comes from your office, what you're funding, who's donating or has a business with your department, has to be transparent. Has to be documented.
Right. So let's say an interest group comes into your Albany office and says, "I want to meet with you," and it's a group that supports hydrofracking. Will you put on your website, "I met today with the pro-hydrofracking lobby of America," or will you not tell your constituents that? How open would you be with your constituents?
Well, to meet with a lobby is just a matter of being educated. In theory, it shouldn't matter whether you're reading a book or whether you're meeting a person. In each case, you're being educated about a certain aspect of the world that you're trying to legislate. But in terms of activity, yes, any activity that you do, any monies going back and forth should be documented.
Okay, that's fair. Ms. Rose?
Clearly, my opponent doesn't actually know how an office functions. You, first and foremost, to have an open and transparent office, have to believe in open and transparency, not only in your Albany office, but in your district office as well. That means having a mobile office, that means having staff available in native languages to address constituent needs. That means having hotlines available 24/7, whether you have a housing issue or an immigration issue. Those are things that I would do as an assemblywoman. We haven't had member items at the state level in the past couple of cycles, but if they were to come back, you know, I believe in participatory budgeting, having open hearings, hearing from different organizations throughout the community about what the priorities are, addressing them with the input of the local community. You know, in terms of meeting with folks, Senator Gillibrand has posted all of her meetings online. That's definitely an interesting proposal. I've never actually seen anyone do it in Albany, and that's definitely something to take into consideration. I would always have my office open, you know, as often as we can, and I really, like I mentioned before, I believe in mobile office. Like if you can't make it to Union Turnpike and Utopia Parkway, you should have a mobile office that comes to you at least once a month, if not more. Those are some of the proposals that I would do as an assemblywoman, ones that I've worked on as a chief of staff and would continue to do so.
All right, this came from the audience, and it's anyone, and probably just a yes or no question. Do you support caps on non-economic damages in civil suits? Do you support caps on non-economic damages in civil suits? Mr. Weprin?
I do not.
Ms. Rozic?
I don't.
Mr. Fuchs?
I do.
You do. Mr. Kim?
I do.
Okay. Another question that came in from the audience, and this one is directed to all the candidates. How would you work to help unions, educators, city workers, transit, etc., keep their strength in bargaining, while at the same time help government manage balancing the books without breaking unions' backs? All right, so collective bargaining, unions. Mr. Kim? How would you work to help unions in the collective bargaining process without breaking their unions' back and keeping in mind the fiscal constraints on government?
Yeah, there too. I mean, I tend to look at things holistically. You know, there's a system there, and so you know, workers definitely need to be protected and be organized. And on the other hand, government, and if you're talking, businesses and corporations also, obviously need to make a profit. So I think it comes down to the issues of partisanship, bipartisanship that we're talking about. I think if both sides be reasonable, and there's always as you're and this actually applies to the issues of corruption too. As you're living, you go about your business, you go about your work, and then the temptations arise to veer off. So I think just keeping the public good in mind, reasonableness in mind, I think that will do a lot of good.
Mr. Fuchs?
I think that unions should definitely have the right to collective bargaining. Maybe in fiscal emergencies not, but government workers should not have the right to strike. There should be arbitration.
Everybody, all government workers. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Bronson.
So I'm being supported by a lot of the major labor unions, like 1199, the UFT, Teamsters, because they know that when I get to Albany, I'm going to be a champion for their family members, their issues. We really need to make sure that unions have their fair contracts and that we protect the Triborough Amendment. Now in this dire economic economy, we really need to be protecting our working families, not hurting them.
Mr. Weprin.
Yeah, I've been a strong supporter of organized labor for many years, my 8 years in the city council, my 3 years in the assembly. I think it's very important that workers have the right to collectively bargain, to negotiate in good faith, and I think the owner, in this case, the government as well as the private sector should negotiate in good faith, and I support a strong union movement and collective bargaining.
Okay, last audience question, and if we can keep it quick. In Queens, district allocations are very limited to Asian Americans in ratio to the population. What can be done about it? In Queens, district allocations, I assume that state government money, are very limited to Asian American in ratio to the population. What can be done about it?
Well, the Asian American community is probably one of the largest growing communities in Queens, and I guess throughout the city. And we've done I've sponsored a number of programs and involved in a number of funding initiatives specifically geared to the new immigrant community, to the Asian community, to the South Asian community. I think we just need more programs, more assistance, more language translation. I think there has been. It's a large growing population, and we just have to keep pace.
Okay, Ms. Rozic, if you can, quickly.
I'm just going to agree with the assumption then.
Okay, Mr. Fuchs.
Is the contention that they need more allocation?
In ratio to the population, as the question was written, what can be done to provide more state allocations to the Asian American population?
Well, I don't know why the Asian population would be singled out in particular. Obviously, services are allocated according to the needs of populations in general.
Okay, Mr. Kim.
I would just argue or say real quickly that I think that Asians now are contributing more than their normal share, and perhaps at the same time receiving less than their fair share. So, other than that, I agree with what Councilman Weprin said.
Okay. Favorite part of the evening, the lightning round? Yes or no only, no pass, no maybe, and I'll be the arbiter again of that. Mr. Mitchell, take it away.
Would you publicly say that you 100% support your party's candidate for president? Showing assembly.
Yes.
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 Aaron.
Is Michael Bloomberg a better mayor than Rudy Giuliani?
I'm not a fan of.
Yes or no?
I would say yes.
Yes.
I would just say I'm getting scared now that Mayor Bloomberg is nearing the end of his term. I think both mayors totally changed the city. So I say yes to both of them.
John?
Is New York City better off now than it was 4 years ago? Assemblyman?
Yes.
Yes, especially the legislature.
Yes.
All right, yes.
Who is the best president in American history?
Best
I thought this
president.
was yes or no. I thought this was a yes or a no.
We'll give moderators privilege, panelist privilege there. Go ahead. Best president.
Best president in United States history. Interesting. I'll say a Republican, Abraham Lincoln.
Response.
So there hasn't been a female president yet, so can I hold out for that one?
Mr. Fuchs.
Toss up between George Washington and Abe Lincoln, I don't know.
I would say the most misunderstood president and the one who has perhaps contributed the most to our modern era, Lyndon Johnson.
Okay.
Do you support increased hydrofracking in New York State?
No.
Absolutely not.
Well, support increase in hydrofracking for what?
In New York State.
In New York State. Well, there's a moratorium on fracking, so there is no fracking.
Would you support legislation to enact hydrofracking in New York State? Allow hydrofracking?
Question mark. It's still it's still being reviewed.
Not at this time.
Have you ever participated in a political demonstration?
Yes.
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 No.
John?
Would you support a wind farm off the Rockaway Peninsula within view of the Rockaway Peninsula? Assembly.
A what farm?
A wind farm, wind energy,
Windmills.
Oh, windmill.
within view of the beaches of the Rockaways.
Off coast?
Off the coast, yeah. As was proposed.
Possibly.
So that's weak.
Yes or no?
Yes.
I'd say yes.
You said a wind farm?
Yeah, so they proposed a couple of years ago creating a wind farm.
Like windmills?
Windmills, yeah.
Windmills.
They're turbines.
Yeah.
Turbine. Would you support that?
Outside of what?
Off the Rockaway Peninsula. Visible from the beach.
Yes.
I don't know all the pros and cons involved, but generally in favor of wind power.
Do you think Andrew Cuomo is doing enough to help Senate Democrats in New York?
Yes.
It's getting better at it.
Yes.
He endorsed my opponent, Senator Stavisky. So.
Right.
Did or do your children attend New York City public schools?
No.
I went to a public high school, but I don't have kids yet.
Don't forget.
Yes, he can answer that. He said yes.
Have you ever voted for a member of the opposite party? Some-
Yes.
No.
Yes.
I helped a member of the opposite party campaign, but I didn't vote for him.
John?
Are you on Facebook?
I am. Well, yes.
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 Barely, yes.
Should New York State legislators be required to disclose their sources of personal income? All of their sources of personal income?
Yes.
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 Aaron? Oh, great.
Whether currently holding office or seeking office, would you run for higher office besides what you're currently seeking?
What was the last part of the motion?
Would you run, besides what you're running for now, would you run for higher office if elected?
I wouldn't rule it out. As John pointed out earlier, I ran for Congress last year. I ran for city controller. Right now, I'm only running for re-election, and I don't contemplate running for higher office. But you never say no. in politics.
Yeah, Greg, why don't you ask me that November 7th?
Highly theoretical, but yes.
I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm absolutely running to win. I'm trying my hardest to win. But I think Senator Stavisky had the original right idea. If I lose, I might just pack up and go be a school teacher. Go the opposite direction.
Aaron?
Okay, you can answer this with not a yes or no, but just free. Who is the best college basketball team? Assemblyman?
St. John's, of course.
Good storm.
Go with St. John.
Unanimous. John, take it away.
Is running for office fun?
Can be.
Well, yes or no.
Overall, yes.
Yes, thrilling.
Yeah.
Parts of it are the best experiences I've ever had. Parts of it are the worst I've ever had.
Yes, no, maybe so.
I'm a lawyer. I'm sorry.
Not a yes, no, but best governor in New York State history.
New York State history.
Yes, no.
Mario Cuomo.
I'd agree with that.
Mr. Fuchs?
I'm not that well versed going back to all the governors, but I'd say Pataki.
I actually like both Cuomo and Pataki. Yes.
All right, John, your last one. Go ahead.
Have you gambled at the Resorts World Casino at Aqueduct Racetrack?
Yes.
No.
No.
I hope to, and I haven't.
Aaron, last one for you.
Do you support term limits for the state assembly and state senate?
No.
Yes.
No.
How long would the term be if you support it?
I don't know.
Senator Stavisky had the best answer ever on that. She's not here, so I'll say it for her. She said there are term limits. People can just vote them out of office. But actually, I do support term limits.
All right, last one from Aaron, and then we'll do closing remarks.
Do you support state-mandated policies imposed on private sector businesses related to vacation, sick, and other benefits?
Yes.
I'd say no.
Yes.
For the last 50 years, we've been trying to figure out what to do with education. We can't figure it out. And the answer is that it's got to be let loose. It's got to go to the private sector. The American creativity and brilliance will figure out what to do with a system that is now broken. We're out of 35 countries, we're 14th in reading. 35 most industrialized countries, we're 14th, we rate 14th in reading, 17th in science, 25th in math. We recently achieved the lowest average SAT scores in 40 years. 65% of our students test at grade level, 65% of our students graduate high school. It can take up to $300,000 in 3 years to fire a bad teacher. And we spend $18,000 per pupil. And there are tuitions out there for $4,000, $7,000 for elementary and high school. And we have to go to a voucher system. Middle-class families are being squeezed. They're paying for rich people to send their kids to public school. They're sending it would break open the educational field, and it would also give more people it would give people more money to spend in the economy.
Ms. Rozic?
So, like I said before, I'm deeply invested in this district and in this community and making government work for growing communities, for underrepresented communities, for young people, for women across the board. I really am eager to use my work ethic, my passion, and my know-how to get things done for Eastern Queens. And no matter which way you're voting in this election, you should go out and vote, you should pull that lever, fill in that bubble, just go do it, vote however you feel your conscience to vote, and make sure that you vote like your generation depended on it, because it's really, really crucial this year.
Thank you all. And before we adjourn, I just want to remind everybody here that we're going to be back 2 weeks from tonight for our federal candidate night. We've already confirmed Wendy Long, U.S. Senate candidate, Grace Meng, and Dan Halloran will be here, as well as Bob Halloran, who's going to be a surrogate for the Romney campaign, and the Obama campaign assures me that they're going to have a surrogate here as well. So we'll be back 2 weeks from tonight for our federal candidate night. And before we adjourn, I want to thank all the candidates for coming out. I want to thank the panelists for being here, and wish everybody a good night. Thank you.